Welcome to the Pages of Hackney podcast. This event was recorded at BSix College on the 26th of September 2022. It is our absolute pleasure to welcome Kehinde Andrews and Emmanuel Onapa to discuss Kehinde's book, The New Age of Empire, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World, published by Penguin. Kehinde Andrews is the UK's first Professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University. He led the establishment of the first Black Studies programme in Europe. He's the chair of the Harrenby Organisation of Black Unity and editor-in-chief of Make It Plain. He's the author of The New Age of Empire, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World, and Back to Black, Retelling Black Radicalism for the 21st Century. Emmanuel Onapa is a writer, journalist and speaker based in London. He's contributed to several publications such as The Metro, The Independent, Rolling Stone UK, Dazed, ID, Tribune Magazine, Mixmag, The iPaper, and many more. After studying at BSix College, he went on to study politics and international relations at the University of Exeter. Emmanuel has always been interested in how black experiences fit into a larger political, social and cultural framework, and much of his work is rooted in documentary, observation, scribing, listening, and learning.
Okay, thanks for coming. Before I start reading, I haven't read the book since I did the audiobook, so if it sounds like I'm really sick of it when I read it, then I know I'm joking. All right, so I'm going to read from chapter 4, which is Colonialism, and I'm from Birmingham. If anybody's been to Cadbury World before, we actually did a neo-colonial tour of Cadbury World with some young people the other day, and some of the staff were really unhappy. But anyway. I don't think I can go back anymore. So, anyway, I'm going to read just a little bit out of this to get us going. So, chapter 4, Colonialism. If you want to see colonialism at work today, take a visit to Cadbury World in Birmingham. The site is still a working factory, the home of the Cadbury Empire, one of Britain's leading brands with annual revenues exceeding $3 billion. From its humble start as a grocery shop in 1824, the company's become a global juggernaut, selling over 350 million of its signature dairy milk bars every year. Cadbury's employs more than 45,000 people worldwide, and including in its supply chain, is responsible for keeping thousands of people in work in the city of Birmingham. Neither the city nor the company is shy of boasting about the tremendous success of the business, and in 1990, Cadbury World opened on the site of its Bourneville factory, attracting visitors to learn about the history and future plans of the company. They have added different attractions over the years, but the central structure of the place has remained the same, exactly the same since I was like a little kid, like it's properly the same. It's not in the book, but I'm just telling you, it's really, really the same. All right. A tour through Cadbury World takes you from the first European encounter with chocolate right through to its present-day production. While the aim is to celebrate the success of the company, walking through the space, it is the perfect tour of neo-colonialism, providing all the ingredients to explain why the West remains just as built on racism today as it ever was. So Aztec civilization greets you when you first step into the exhibition. Well, a plastic replica of a jungle, replete with some smiling cocoa beans and wax figures. There is at least a recognition that Europeans did not invent or discover chocolate, which was introduced to the continent when the Spanish brought it back from South America. In fairness to the creators, they give a nod to some of the violence committed by the Spanish and reference the Aztec ruler Montezuma being killed by the forces of Cortez in the 16th century. But typical of how this period is remembered, the genocide we have already explored is breezily skipped over. I suppose recounting the murder of tens of millions in a children's attraction would be bad for business. After you learn about the origins of chocolate, the story moves to Birmingham and the founding of the original shop by John Cadbury in 1824. We hear about his ingenuity, hard work, and how he came up with a magic formula for the incredibly popular dairy milk. In these foundation stories, we are told about cocoa and milk, but conspicuous in its absence is any reference to the other main ingredient, which is, of course, sugar. As we saw in the last chapter, sugar was one of the main slave-produced commodities. When Cadbury's began as a small shop, slavery was still fully functioning in the British Empire, and slave-produced sugar would have made it into the country until at least 1888, when Brazil abolished the system. Cadbury's became a huge commercial success after the latter part of the 19th century, in building the Bourneville factory in 1878. So it's often not seen as having ties to slavery. But this misses the point for two main reasons. Firstly, Cadbury's is able to open Bourneville due to the wealth it had generated from using slave-produced sugar. As you've already seen, wealth developed from slavery was used after abolition to continue development. More importantly, the ending of slavery did not stop the exploitative relationship between the Caribbean and the rest of the empire, Caribbean or the empire and Britain. Caribbean colonies continued to produce sugar, often in dire conditions and certainly for pay that was not too far removed from the realities of slavery. Sugar production was a system created by slavery with a workforce descended from those stolen in change and indentured labourers from other parts of the empire. There was nothing clean about the sugar that went into building Cadbury's. I could go on for it. I'm going to stop there. But there's a whole thing about Cadbury's and it's terrible. So yeah, Cadbury's is bad. And if you have any questions, I'll give you some more details. Yeah.
Can we give him a round of applause? Yeah, so basically, my heart's beating right now. I haven't done this in a while in front of a large audience. I think the last time I did one of these was, in fact, I did one of these like 2 weeks ago, but it was literally for like 5 minutes, so it's a bit different. But I guess we'll just get into it then. So my first question to you would be like, what made you want to write this book, The Age of the Empire?
So actually, the New Age of Empire is a prequel, really. So Back to Black was all about black radical politics. What is revolution? What do we do? It's very much not practical, but like has like suggestions for this is how we go forward. But when I wrote that book and then I talked to a lot of people, it became obvious that people needed to first be convinced what the scale of the problem is. Like, racism isn't something that is just. We think about racism as being prejudice. Like, somebody doesn't like this person. That's not racism. Racism is built into the very structure of the society we have. So the only way to get rid of it is revolution. But before people get to that point, they need to understand that racism is baked into the very structures of society. And that's what the New Age of Empire is. So the feedback I often get is that the book's a bit bleak. Where's the hope? And that's not this book. The hope is Back to Black. This is just a problem. And the problem should terrify you, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. When I was growing up, a lot of the times people used to focus on things to do with like words when it comes to racism. But as you said, it is a systemic issue and there's no racism without looking at the systemic issues at play. So that leads me to my next question, which is, in the opening introduction, you say we urgently need to destroy the myth that the West was founded on the 3 great revolutions of science, industry, and politics. Why do you think we need to do so?
Because it's a lie? I don't know. No, because like this is the Cadbury World thing. I stopped reading because we're going along, but the whole point of the Cadbury World thing is this point, right? Like we celebrate these kind of inventors or these factories because of their hard work, etc. Even Cadbury's we celebrate because in Bourneville they created like a whole village. They had like really good working practices for people in the city, and because of that we celebrate. We celebrate a lot of these kind of philanthropists from the past because of those reasons. But actually, if you look, where did they get their money from? What was the basis of it? It was exploiting black labor. So Cadbury's is still built on the fact that the average wage for cocoa farmers is less than $1.50 a day today. That's less than that today. So they're still exploiting that wealth and then bringing it here so they can pretend to be philanthropists. Actually, the reality is none of those good things that we have here, industrial development, philanthropy, etc., is possible without racial exploitation. It wasn't possible then. It's definitely not possible now. And so when you have that myth that somehow it's better, it's good, that's the worst thing, right? You have to first understand that none of this is positive. Yeah. It's all built on racial exploitation.
100%. That leads me to my next question, which is, how has the discontinuation of Europe's direct administration of their colonies created space for America to become the natural center of the empire?
Yeah, so there's a quote. It's not in the book because I was reading Malcolm afterwards, and I gave a whole speech the other day and didn't mention Malcolm. Like that's like the first time ever. So you're gonna get lots of Malcolm X now because I feel like I have to make up for it. But Malcolm has this idea where he talks about the shift to benevolent colonialism, and really the only thing that changes. So Second World War, there is a shift. So you have this, originally it was European nation state led, so the British Empire, the French Empire, the Portuguese Empire. But that can't hold for too long for they're fighting each other. And in fact, both the world wars are really about colonialism. The First World War is almost solely about colonialism, and the Second World War is about the First World War. So really this is the two colonies, these are the colonies crashing and coming together, tearing each other apart. That means that one, they can't, like Britain's broke after the Second World War. Also, the world wars were world wars, so the millions of black and brown people fought in these wars, and they've got guns, and they're saying, well, we're not going to take this anymore. So that period of colonialism has to end after the Second World War, but it doesn't. It's just replaced. And Malcolm talks about basically the European powers. It's like when you're playing basketball, and they were trapped, they were stuck, they had nowhere to go, so they passed the ball, and who do they pass the ball to? The United States, because the United States is just Europe on steroids. Really, that's what it is. Just Europeans let loose on a place where they just commit terrible barbaric violence and create their society. So in some ways, the shift away from Europe to America was always going to happen. That's kind of the purpose of what America is. And so America then is in a position because of oil, because of its reserves, et cetera. And then it just takes over, and you get what Malcolm calls benevolent colonialism, where the US pretends, like the US likes to pretend it's like a revolutionary country, and it pretends it's helping the world, and so you no longer need that kind of nation state solid colonialism. What you have instead, and these all happen almost at the same time, World Trade Organization, United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, those are creations of Britain and predominantly America to administer the next phase of colonialism, which does it through economics. So actually, that's why Cadbury's is a perfect example, where workers in Ghana are no longer under the cosh of the colonial administrator, but they're under the cosh of the big company, right, the corporation. It's not really any different. It feels different to you because you can vote, but actually in reality it's exactly the same.
100%. And one thing that you pointed out just now is that you talk about like racism after, like, when it came after the World War and stuff like that. A lot of the times in society we see, like, especially like in history and just like this discourse that we have like amongst ourselves in society, is that we talk about racism like it just became a thing when the World War happened and the Windrush generation happened. Why do you think that is so problematic? Because that frustrates me all the time when I see people talking about that and just
Yeah, well, the problem you have with the UK's specific context is that because, not Europe, actually Europe in general, is that the European powers had a distance, so they exported their colonialism. So slavery doesn't happen in the United Kingdom. And in fact, you will find no laws, British laws, that allow slavery. In fact, slavery was illegal in Britain in the 1750s, right? And a lot of historians will like say, "Oh, look at this! England wasn't racist. We had no slavery. You couldn't have slaves here, but you could in the Caribbean and in Britain. Yeah. And Britain was the place that enslaved the Royal African Company is the company that enslaves the most Africans, right? So because of that, Britain's able to distance itself from racism. Whereas if you opposed to like America, where there's slavery before there is America, there's 40 million African Americans. You can see it in the laws. Here, you can't see it in the laws. So it's only when we start to come over here that then people say, oh, now it's racist. Now we've got racism. No, it was always racist. And Britain, if any country invented racism, Britain is certainly one of the most important parts of it. But because we weren't physically here in large numbers, it didn't have to be expressed. But the idea that means that Britain only just has a problem with racism now is completely and utterly nonsensical.
I thought like, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but I read somewhere that was just like, oh, they didn't allow like slaves to come to Britain because like, oh, Britain was like too holy land to like be here. Am I wrong? Or
no, they did. They brought their enslaved Africans to Britain. And in fact, by 1780, I want to say by 1780, there was about 15,000 Africans in Britain, mostly bought because people would like bring their servants over it. Yeah. But people stopped because in 17, I'm actually not a historian, so like when you have to be actually the dates. I don't know. 1772.
You can call a Carla for that.
Yeah, exactly. But in 1770, I always think 1772. There's this case in England, English courts. James Boston. That's the case. James Boston case. Who is somebody who he's enslaved. He's brought over as a servant, and then he runs away, and then he goes to the courts and basically says, "Look, there's no laws in England for slavery, so you can't send me back. I'm not property here." And he wins basically, right? And so after that, people are much more like, maybe we shouldn't bring our Africans here because they can run away, right? That's the contradiction you have in England. You can run if you're in England, you're free. You're not. But if you're in the Caribbean, it's perfectly fine for you to be treated as a slave.
100%. There's one thing that stuck out to me when you were speaking. You talked about international organizations such as the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, all these like liberal organizations. What role do they play in upholding like the global system, which is neo-colonialism and capitalism, and why do you think that's such an issue in like today's society and just being progressive, in fact? Because we see it all the time, like these organizations, they barge into like African nations in claiming for like human rights atrocities and stuff like that. Yet they on their own land and stuff like that. Just like we see with like Chris Carver, what happened to him and his death, that was a human rights issue. And what is like these neoliberal organizations doing?
Yeah, because the purpose of them is to maintain the economic order. And so when they make them, that's the whole point of them, right? And in theory, once you grant independence to countries, then they can do what they want, right? They can do anything. But actually, the rules of the economic, there are very specific rules to global economic finance, which are dictated largely by the West and bodies like IMF, World Bank, etc. And those two in particular, so the World Bank and IMF in particular, like I think I say it in the book, like if I don't like really calling things devils, but those two things are like devils. Like honestly, like the impact they have on the world are horrendous, right? And the way that they work is they'll basically, so if you imagine you have a country that's all the British Empire like countries have been drained of resources. The book to read on this is Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and leave the state that countries were left in when they were independent. There is no possibility that they could have succeeded. Like zero. There's no hospitals, there's no schools, there's no infrastructure. All the infrastructure is taking everything out. Like you're just not going to be able to, there's no chance. So what happens is they very quickly fall into debt. And then they have to go to the West and say, well, look, we need stuff. And IMF, World Bank, if you look at the conditions they put on those loans, completely and utterly destroy the countries further. And that's what keeps them in huck. So for example, Ghana is a good example. Ghanaian rice production, which I actually talk about more in Back to Black, where because of Kwame Nkrumah's...
You spoke about in your intro.
Yeah,
of the book.
Yeah, because Ghana's so under Kwame Nkrumah's like Pan-African say, look, we're not going to allow foreign rice imports in. So Ghanaian rice production boom, because if you want to eat rice and Ghanaians like rice, you've got to have Ghanaian rice. It makes sense, right? So massive booming rice production, and they actually want to develop their rice better. So they go and get this loan from the IMF to irrigate their fields better, and they can compete in the global market. IMF say, fair enough, we'll give you the loan, but it's got these strings attached. One of those is you can no longer ban foreign rice imports. You have to be free trade, open to the free market.
And they sell it wheat for cheap.
And then guess what happens? American rice comes in. Worse than that, it's not even free. It's not even like the same rules. So American rice is heavily subsidized by the government, but Ghana is not allowed to subsidize their rice under the terms of the IMF. So it's not even like you're competing on a level playing field. So the result is you get flooded with foreign American rice. You go to Ghana now, there's no rice production. And it's actually impoverished the country. They actually took a loan which they are still paying back it's actually destroyed their rice production. It's insane. Like when you think about it, it's insane, right? And you can find example after that, where these institutions are not helping countries. They're actually making noise. And I think in the book I do point out that all the evidence is there's so much of it. Anytime IMF, World Bank get involved, it just has negative consequences.
Even with like the embargoes, right, that is happening and stuff like that.
This embargoes, the trade policies. If you think about, so what we complaining about here with austerity, neoliberalism, they did all of this in Africa and the third world long time. Like they just that's the boomerang effect coming back here. And we're complaining about it now, but this is already destroyed places already. Like I think I will give you. I can go for loads of examples, but just visit Nigeria and then tell me that neoliberalism works because it's a disaster.
I think a lot of the time we focus on like the West, like obviously America, and as we rightly so we should. But what about like China as well? What is China doing? How have they adapted the Western colonial logic in enriching their countries in order to like plundering African nations as well at the same time and their resources?
Yeah, so in the book there's a chapter, the non-white West, because the sad reality is that racism is like white supremacy is a hierarchy. There's black at the bottom, white at the top, and there's a hierarchy in between. And in fact, if you look at the global map, this is exactly what it looks like when it comes to income. So the richest, poorest parts of the world, black Africa basically, richest part of the world, the white West, and then there is a very clear, and you can see it visually. And if you look at somewhere like China, China was one of the poorest countries in the world not that long ago. And then it's a very particular shift. So after Mao Zedong dies, who's revolutionary and supporting African revolution movements, and after he dies, they change. They say, no, we don't. This isn't working. And you can see it's a very clear shift where they say what we're going to do is we're essentially going to replicate the West, but not exactly, because they've got 1 billion people. They basically just super exploit about 300 million poor Chinese people who become the workers who make stuff, who produce stuff in really terrible conditions, right? And then that becomes the basis which then China comes into the world economy.
Yeah.
But in order for China to be the place that produces stuff, they have to get the resources, right? And where do the resources come from? Africa. And if you actually look at China's involvement in Africa and China's leap up the league tables of money, it all happens after 2001 when they joined the World Trade Organization and basically start rinsing out African resources in exactly the same way that's probably a bit worse. They probably rinse their resources a bit worse than Europe is doing. So China's growth and wealth and prosperity is really based on the same colonial model of stealing resources from Africa.
Yeah.
But the problem, because they're not white and because there's this history of China's cooperation, some Africans are like, yeah, great, China. But they're doing the same. If you actually look at what they're doing, it's exactly the same
And
thing.
not only that, it's like a lot of these African nations are now in debt to like China.
Yeah.
So it's just like,
They're in debt to China. They're all their. So like one deal that China did with Congo, basically China paid basically like $7 billion in a loan to develop mining, where most of that money went to Chinese companies to develop the mining, and for that they got access to $90 billion of I think it was coltan, right? So it's just not. It's the economics are crazy. It's literally just stealing the wealth from Africa in the same way that Europe and the West are doing.
100%. That leads me to my next question. We see a lot of like people from the global south migrate to the West in order for like a better life and so forth. How does that link to like colonialism and the past and the climate change in the past and the climate change issue that we're having now?
Yeah, so it's two parts. So one is it's because of that massive imbalance of wealth. Like, so if you live in the West, you're likely to live a lot longer. Like, you're likely to have access to stuff that you don't have outside the West. Like, I don't want to paint a picture. You don't want to paint a picture of just poverty in Africa, but the poverty is serious, right? It's poverty that we don't understand. Yes, there are people who have money and there's wealth. It's not all poor, but the places which are poor in a way that we don't understand.
Yeah.
One of the stats for the book was a child born in Somalia today has more chance of dying by their 5th birthday than a US soldier had of being killed in combat in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
I mean, it's literally
That's
insane.
insane.
Like, when you actually think about, the life expectancy of Nigeria is 54. 54. Nigeria is supposed to be one of the richest countries in Africa. The life expectancy is 54. Like, when people, remember when COVID didn't really affect Africa that much? It's because the life expectancy is less than 60 on the continent. There's not that many old people, so it's not going to. And we actually celebrate these things. Like, we say Africa is one of the youngest continents. Yeah, it's because people die early. Like, that's not actually a good thing, right? So you can see why. So why is it? So that's why you have all these push factors where people want to leave. And think about the migrant crisis, which became a thing with Syrian, but actually the migrant crisis is predominantly West Africans who aren't fleeing war, they're just fleeing poverty. And if poverty is that bad, they're willing to cross the Sahara, go through Libya, and get on boats to come here. That's the world we've created, where people are so desperate to live here. It's not that people want to live here. Who wants to live? Who want to live here? Why would my family want to come from the Caribbean and come and live here? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? So that whole idea of that immigrant is just, it just shows you the imbalances. And then add on the fact that maybe God is a white supremacist, because no, come on, but like, Europeans destroy the world with climate change, with fossil fuels, and then it's the bloody black and brown part of the world that get all the hurricanes and floods in there. Like, you have to wonder, like, at some point, what is going on? So there's a massive disproportionate impact on the developed world, and part of that again is infrastructure. So because countries don't have the wealth, they can't provide the safety nets that you have here. So like, look, somewhere like it's probably actually more about that. You look at somewhere like Holland, which really should have sank a long time ago, but because they're so wealthy, they've got lots and lots of protections. Whereas that's obviously not the case if your country's been stripped of resources for the West.
100%. I think we talk a lot about how colonialism has impacted somebody's physical living and stuff like that. But what about their mental? Like, I know Frantz Fanon, he discusses how it impacts their psyche. So what is the trauma that colonialism still impacts black and indigenous community today, both in the West and the global South?
Well, I think the trauma is the lived experience of trauma. So partly, again, if you live in, I went to Nigeria before lockdown, and I don't know, I can't even explain how bad some parts are. Like, it's not even possible to really describe it, right? And that those conditions are trauma in themselves, right? And then you also have the trauma even here. Like, we like to celebrate like multicultural cities, but it's not really like, what does that mean? Like, you know, where black neighborhoods, you know what they look different. They're just different, right? They're just physically different, and that is in itself like something which is which you understand as you're walking around. Like that's something that is with you, and it's also so much with you because the police arrest you. Things like that. Like you get actual issues. You got people like my children are. They're essentially afraid of the police, right? And they should be, because you could get
I am
more
as
likely to
well.
get killed, right? Like you have to. So imagine you're walking around seeing the police, and that's trauma because you're just like, there's the police. So every part, and you have to because we live in this world which is structured around white supremacy and racism. We just have to. We kind of get used to it, but it's really traumatic, right? So it's the next book I'm writing or have written is The Psychosis of Whiteness, which tries to flip this idea of psychosis on its head. But there is a reality that black people are more likely to suffer from mental health problems. But it's pretty obvious why, I would suggest, because we have to deal with racism, and it does it. It mad you in it.
Yeah, and the trauma's embedded as well, right? We see that like through like just like the skin lightening like products that like people in the black community use, and also like the hair straightening stuff and all of that. Like that's embedded trauma that has been passed down, and which is like embedded in our psyche from like having to appeal to be white.
Yeah.
So my next question is, for anybody that doesn't know, what is racial capitalism?
It's just capitalism. I mean, really, like, you know, it's honestly capitalism. There's no way to understand capitalism without racism. Like you could say, in theory, is it possible to have a capitalist economic system without racism? I suppose, but the one that we have is 100% based on racism. In fact, it couldn't possibly exist without racism. So what is it to start? Like, if you think stock.
Please say that louder for like you know.
I mean, like the idea that it could like stock exchange.
Yeah.
That's in Holland. Where do they get the gold standard from? Where do they get the gold from? There was Mayans in like they literally went to the Americas. They killed millions of indigenous people and they started enslaving Africans. Right. So if you look at all the key things that make Western development, first it's gold, silver. That enriches, brings over this money. You have this idea of stocks and shares, etc., etc., etc. Then tobacco, then sugar, then cotton. All of the commodities which were built capitalism are based on racism, and not even a little bit, like 100% could not have been produced without racism. In the history books, in the white history books, they talk about the Atlantic system. It's just slavery. Like it's slavery. That's what we know as slavery, and it's the Atlantic system of slavery which produces capitalism. So, like I say, it's not racial capitalism; it's just capitalism.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also like we actually like as like I don't know who classes themselves as a leftist. We really need to like interrogate the notion that leftists can't be racist too. Like we see it like within like the trade union movements and what's going on there, and like even just recently, like when we saw like these trade unions supporting the monarchy and like they stopped their strikes. Like what is that about?
Did they stop
like,
the strikes?
I'm so yeah. Like
I didn't know they stopped the strikes.
what is that about? Like I'm so sorry as a black man, and I'm pretty sure a lot of black people we're not supporting the monarchy out here. So why are you stopping striking? I'm
How
so
did they
sorry.
stop a strike? Surely nobody was working. Surely that is a strike.
Yeah, my next question is the abolitionist Ruth Wilson Gilmore addressed how prisons are a consequence of state failure, but quickly learned that they were state building projects. How do prisons play a role in upholding the legacy of colonialism today?
So the prison thing is, you think about like the legacy. Think about particularly with, why are black people here? Why are we here in so many big numbers? It's slavery, right? It was labor. That was the purpose of it. That's what we're brought over here to do. But they don't need no labor anymore. This is the central problem of what do you do with black people when you don't need their labor? Well, you could kill them all, right? Which is something people thought about, right? You could deport us all, which is what they wanted to do, send us to like Sierra Leone or something like that. Or you can imprison loads of people. Like, this has become the thing. Like this criminality thing, this imprisoning thing has become part of the way that you address black people because we're seen to be more aggressive, violent, criminal, etc., etc. And the states, you see it clear because it's the only real difference between here and the States is there's more black people. Yeah. If there was as many black people here as there were in the States, it would be identical. Yeah. Like we have exactly the same problems. There's less of us, so we're easier to control in a sense, right? But so you have this. It doesn't make any economic sense to incarcerate as many people as are incarcerated. It doesn't make. It's crazy. They're spending billions and billions and billions. And this is what Ruth Gilmore Wilson says. She's saying, well, like, this doesn't make economic sense. So something else is happening here. What is happening here? And like I think in the book you can do the maths where you say, well, actually, just doing a universal basic income for everybody in America will be cheaper than mass incarceration. But they'll never do that because such an important part of America is white supremacy. And you can't give black people money in white supremacy, right? You can't. So what do you do with us? Disempower us, ghettoize us, imprison us, etc., etc. And that becomes part of the way that the state runs and functions. And even now, if you look in the States, when they're just talking about reform, like put a few less black people in prison, like basically.
Thank you.
It's so like, there's many ways one of the things which shocked me, like, because I know the numbers is 60% of black young men who don't have a high school degree will go to prison. 60%. Like if you don't graduate high school, you have more chance of going to prison.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in the book it said something about 1 in 3 black men are more likely to go into prison by the time in a specific area. And let me try to find it.
But so I think what is it? 60%. If you're young black and you don't have a high school degree, 60% of you will go to prison. It's still 40%, even if you have a degree. Like, it's still a crazy number. Like, it's like we're still high. And I remember I was at a university talking to professors in America, and they said they were doing it was a day for parents of children who were incarcerated, and I assumed this was a community thing, right? Because in the UK, like, class kind of protects you. It was not a community. This was for their kids. This was for the professors' kids. Professors earning twice as much money as I earn. Their kids are still going to prison. That's how bad mass incarceration is. It touches everybody in the United States. It's mad. If you're black, your chances of going to prison are insanely high, right? And there's no way to explain that. That's not the state failing. That's not the state failing. That's the state doing what it's meant to do.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no other way. That is what it is set out to do. Right?
And that's why I feel like we need to move forward from reforming, like, these conversations of reforming, like, the criminal justice system, because no, you can't reform something that's meant to. Its whole purpose was to act and maneuver of exploitation and manipulation of black and brown communities. So I think that leads to my next question. In terms of the quote that I was looking for, you're gonna have to read your book yourselves to find it, because I'm not spending like 20 minutes looking for it. But to my next question is, with the recent murder of Chris Carver by the police and other killings by like the police, such as like Mark Duggan, and the long-standing history of death in police custody, how has colonial-era policing still thrive in our black and brown communities? And the links to it, how the links to how we are policed today in working class and black and brown communities? Did you get the question?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, you can see it's very clear connection to why are we more likely to be murdered by the police? It's simple. Like, these are those ideas that black people are almost superhuman, physically stronger, more aggressive, dangerous. So it's fine to shoot us when we're unarmed because we're still dangerous. Yeah. Right. And that is deeply embedded in the psyche. But then also it's about the practices. So when you think about where are police, so this is always like there's not more crime in black communities. There's just more police in black communities. Right. The police's function isn't to stop crime. The police's function has always been, in many ways, about property. Largely, it's about property, largely. And it's about containing the poor.
And not only just that, like, if you look at it, like, if you're stripped a community of their resources, they don't own their estates, the youth clubs they don't own it, they don't have it anymore. What do you actually expect from them? Like, do you expect them to not, like... Yeah, it's a bit self-explanatory.
Well, but that's state build. That's the whole point, isn't it? Like, you create, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't let people get jobs, and then you wonder why they commit crime, and then you arrest them for committing crime, right? Like that, and that's essentially what happens. That's essentially the pattern that happens. But black male youth unemployment is 40%, and it's got 40%. Like, imagine how that's the same as it was before the Brixton uprisings in '81. So if you got 40% young people haven't got jobs, what are they gonna do? Because they're gonna do crime, and then you arrest them, put them in prison, and cast. That's like, those things aren't disconnected. They're very, very much connected. So when we talk about institutional racism, the worst way we can do it is say, well, just look at the police by itself. You can't understand the police by itself. Police are part of a much, much, much bigger system.
100%. That leads me to my next question, which was, how has the abolition of slavery created space for punitive, discriminatory policies and legislations in the criminal justice system which disproportionately impact black and brown communities today?
in every way, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, partly it's economic. So, and this is the trick that people will tell you now. Well, not even just now. Like the UK likes to talk about class, and a lot of these things are economic. So if you have money and you don't, having money helps, right? But you'd have to explain why black people are far more likely to be in the working class, right?
100%.
And that's racism.
Yeah.
So it's a classic, but it's actually
Goes
about
back
racism.
to racial capitalism.
Yeah,
and
this is
stuff
why I
like
say
that.
capitalism is racism, right? So partly that's historic. So if I'm from a family that didn't have anything at all until after slavery, didn't have any, like, couldn't actually own anything, and then like we imagine that slavery ends, and all of a sudden everything's fine. Like it's like a free market, just do what you know. Slavery basically continues, right? It's a mass poverty, etc. My family came over here with basically nothing, and many people have this family that came over to the UK with basically nothing, and then even if they had something, came over to the UK and had to do menial work. So still didn't have anything. Had to live in overcrowded housing in the city, being over-policed, etc., etc. Kids couldn't get education, etc. So then you're creating this position where we're marginalized and disadvantaged, and then what you do with us then is arrest us, right? And then all that is it's like I said, it's all part of this bigger issue. And then you add in that basic idea. Those stereotypes are still there, that we're more aggressive, more violent, need to be controlled. Like black people die in restraint. Like 5 people jump on a man because they obviously those are so much still embedded, and that's what leads to us getting killed.
Even like with in the healthcare system, like picking on black women, like how they're treated in our hospitals as well is it's outrageous.
Yeah, black women can't feel pain, so that's why they don't. And this is all the evidence shows. The doctors don't listen. They tell you we're in pain, they don't listen, and then people die.
100%. That leads me to like my next question. Like, how can like identity politics and black people in like higher power, I should say, like positions of power, continuously exacerbate the colonial system that is already there today? For example, like Obama, right? A lot of people support that guy, but it's just like.
I mean, he's not the worst, I suppose, right? Like, the most you can say about Obama is he's not the worst.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know. But I did promise my mum. I promised my mum I'd stop bad mouthing Obama. But no, the problem is like, actually, no. I was gonna not bad mouth Obama, but in fact, Obama is probably the worst.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's someone like Kwasi Kwarteng. You know Kwasi. No one taking him seriously.
100%.
Like, you know what I mean? There's not going to be no parades if he becomes prime minister. Remember, Kemi Badenoch was supported by the Britain First. I didn't know one black person that would be celebrating Kemi Badenoch becoming prime minister, right? So in some ways, they're not actually that harmful. We know what they are, right? Whereas someone like Obama is different because he kind of feels like it's different, feels like change. Yeah. My mum, black radical, keeps telling me off for calling about, etc. So in some ways it's worse, right? Because the worst thing you want to do is legitimize white supremacy. And that's what someone like Obama did. Yeah. Like if you look at Obama, 8 years he was president, every single indicator for black people got worse. Every single one, apart from one. The only thing that got better was the employment rate went up, but then food stamp usage ballooned by I think it was like 110%. It was like a massive, no, it was 11 times. Food stamp went up really high in black communities. And the reason was because black people were getting jobs, but just terrible jobs. They didn't pay. So there's a book, Kehinde Andrews Taylor, Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. And I couldn't believe, I had to read it like 4 times. Like, this cannot be true. But apparently in New York City, half of all black people who have jobs work in fast food restaurants. Half of all black people who have jobs work in fast food restaurants. That's not work. Like, let's be honest, that's not work. That's why you have such food insecurity, etc., etc. So you have this black president for 8 years who was celebrated, but he didn't do anything. Why are we celebrating? It's just the same thing carried on. And that's the worst thing, because then we imagine that something somehow changed just because we got a black person.
100%. A fox in sheep clothing, right?
Yeah.
Right? My next question would be, also before I get to the next question, we talk about Bill Clinton as well, like
the first black president.
Yeah, the first black president. Everybody was celebrating him so much, but it's like, didn't he introduce like his crime bill, which was like disproportionately impacting black people? Like, talk to us about that and how that was.
Clinton was terrible. Like the crime bill. So that crime bill is one of the, not the only thing, but one of the big factors for mass incarceration, where this goes up, etc., etc. No, but Clinton, that one I don't get. That one, I think we were so desperate for someone playing the saxophone. And everybody lost their minds like that. Clinton was horrendous.
100%.
I died. Yeah.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. What role does the 21st century abolition play in rebuilding a system where the legacy of colonialism is eradicated? And I'm talking about like the abolitionists of like Angela Davis, what's her name? Carver, what's her name? Okay, Angela Davis, like Ruth Gilmore. Yeah, those abolitionists. What do they play in like eradicating the system that we have today in terms of like transformative justice and like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel there's some really good ideas out there about like moving on, like abolition, for example, getting rid of the system, etc. I think I don't want to be too negative because I think one of the issues of abolition as a concept is that abolition doesn't necessarily abolition of slavery didn't abolish anything, and I think there is a if you look at a lot of the details of abolition stuff, it doesn't really abolish anything, right? It makes things a bit better, but actually the broader system is still there, right? So if we say let's abolish prisons, okay, well you abolish prisons, but if you don't sit with the rest of the stuff out, then you'll replace it with something else, right? So there's definitely some really good ideas and notions out there, but I think I don't know when we stop talking about revolution. Like revolution is what we're talking about. But there's a reason why people would say abolition and not revolution. And I think that's one of the reasons why really a lot of this stuff is reform, but packaged as though it's something more than reform, if I'm honest.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if I agree with you with that. Because I'm an abolitionist, I'm an abolitionist myself, and I feel like when we look at transformative justice and like the frameworks that it operates in, like what it's arguing and fighting for, it's about rebuilding systems of care and like making sure that we have a system where black people are not exploited, where they're not criminalized in any way, shape or form. So yeah,
but it's that's revolution. So why do I call it that?
Oh, true. But then again, abolition and revolution, I feel like they're basically the same thing, no? But like I said, there's loads of good work. I'm not against it. Yeah, 100%. I think my next question is, let's talk about Brexit. So the Brexit vote was genuinely, yeah, I know you guys are probably tired of that, but the Brexit vote was greatly influenced by colonial nostalgia. Why do you think that is? And please explain to us, if anybody doesn't know, what is colonial nostalgia?
It's the yearning for when Britain was great, right? And when was Britain great? When it was openly racist, colonial. You saw it with this Queen nonsense, that kind of heyday, the glory days when Britannia ruled the world, and they could do whatever. And the British Empire was the largest empire in history, and people forget it's not that back in the day they didn't teach empire. It's that they taught empire and were really, really proud of it. They had empire days, they celebrated empire. It was a good thing. And then now we don't talk about it at all. But the empire was a massive source, and I guess it should have been in some ways a massive source of pride for the nation. And then that decline and loss of empire and that decline of standing. And Britain's this little place in the middle of the Atlantic. How on earth did it become top 4 economy, leader of the world, etc., etc.? That's all empire, racism, etc., etc. Now that position has slipped and declined, and the other thing is, when it was empire days, there weren't that many of us here, right? Yeah. So it's not just a yearning for greatness; it's a yearning for whiteness. Yeah. Less black and brown people, right? We don't want you here. So it's this kind of idea of similar to Trump's "Make America Great Again," make Britain great again when it was white and when we ruled the world, right? But that means we can't be here. So the immigration thing has become, and if you think about Britain, the first, and Europe in general, our racist policies aren't like the Constitution, like in America. Our first racist policies are anti-immigration policies, which come in very, very quickly after we start coming in, like almost straight away. We start coming in, it's like an anti-immigration. And so Brexit is just the kind of, it's not just about immigration, but it's basically just about immigration, right? How do we control our borders, keep people out, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, to be honest, if they wanted to win the Brexit referendum, all they need to do is remind people that most of the migrants are bloody white people. They would have won. We could have remained. That's what they had to do. Just remind everybody it's white people. They'd be fine. Because that's the irony of all of this. More Eastern Europeans came than Caribbean people came in this so-called Windrush generation. Yeah. That's not a new thing. That's been happening for a very, very, very long time.
And even if you see with Ukraine, right, how it was so quick to let them into British waters and stuff. And I think 60% of people. Quick question to the audience: how many of you support the empire? Put your hands up.
No one's going to say yes. Now, even if they do, they're going to say yes.
Well, 60% of people think that the empire is something to be proud of in this nation. So the 60% is clearly not here then. Yeah, many people now also still think that the monarchy is obsolete, but its function was never was never fit for purpose in the first place. How do you think the monarchy and the empire uphold white supremacy and colonialism?
Well, no, they are fit for purpose. That's the point,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
if the point is to have, think about the what is the monarch represents the nation, right?
Yeah,
Almost exclusively white family. You got one really light skinned black woman comes in, that's where they go mad. It's like, oh my God, it's not white anymore. Jeez, we can't take it. So you have it's almost exclusively white family, elite, Britain likes its class, privilege, etc. And that's the monarch. That's the representation of Britain to the world. That's what it's supposed to do, right? The empire is all about racism and colonial domination, which is why the queen and the king parade with all the jewels and the gold, etc., etc. It's all about this image of white supremacy. That's what the monarchy does. That's why people are so mad at Meghan Markle, because she don't fit the image of white supremacy.
Yeah.
Simple as that, right? And that's why the monarchy will maintain. Will carry on, because it does what it needs to do. So if you say 60% of people support the empire, why wouldn't they support the crown?
yeah.
Those two things are totally and utterly intertwined.
100%, 100%. What is racial patriarchy? Yeah.
So, racial patriarchy is, again, you could just say it's patriarchy, right? It's the idea that race is the foundation for the way that this society works is race. Like, it just is. And the patriarchy predates, you could say patriarchy predates race as a concept, which is true, right? Patriarchy certainly predates the West as an idea, right? But what happens when you have racism, which sets the economic foundation, political foundation, then you get racial patriarchy.
Yeah.
So the expression of patriarchy is in itself, you can't just say patriarchy. It's where you have black feminism, right? So black feminists saying, well, this white feminism don't really work. Like, for instance, in white feminism, there's a whole debate about the housewife.
Yeah.
Well, there are some black housewives, but not many, right? We were brought here to work. Like, the idea that we have the luxury of it, that's not a thing, right? So when you start to then say, well, actually, how does racism impact patriarchy? It plays out differently. And you can make, and then in fact, you can make a strong argument that the way that black men are treated is about patriarchy, right? Black men are gendered in a particular way, right? There's we're this aggressive, violent, etc., which means we're more likely to be killed by police. So these aren't separate things. And one of the, I think it's in the book here. There's one of the reasons they wanted black nurses from the Caribbean, because they wanted to put white women back in the home. They're saying, we want this NHS, but we don't want white women working. You got to go back into the house, and we're going to get these black women to come and do the work. That's racial patriarchy. You can't. There's not one patriarchy you can understand without looking through the lens of racism.
100%. Like, sometimes we see the myth of like black people, black communities being blamed for single parent households. How has like colonialism like impacted that at its root today? And like, like the stat of single parent headed households is true, right? But why is it true? Why is it the case? So I already said 40% black male youth unemployment. So if you can't work, and we're told, patriarchy says you're supposed to be the provider, etc., but you can't. Like, many just can't. It's not possible, right? Then you have mass incarceration, so more likely to be imprisoned. I mean, in the States, it's like there's 1.5 million less black men than there are black women in walking around America, largely because of mass incarceration. What does that mean? That means that people, the idea that you can be there when you're in prison is not really the case, right? Yeah.
And then if you look at migration in the UK and the migration patterns, the way that has meant that people come, like, even my family did this. My grandmother came first, and then she sent for my kids. They sent for she had kids here, then sent for my dad afterwards. That's caused a whole load. And there's so many intergenerational stuff with that happening, with men coming first and then having families, etc., etc. So there's a historical thing. There's a economic piece of it too. There's the way that the particular way that black men are marginalized makes it difficult. It's more difficult practically. This is not because black men are witless and don't want to be with their kids. This is a structural thing which we are put into.
Yeah.
And even then, and I have said all of that. The actual research is that black men are more likely to be involved in their kids' lives. Just because you're not in the house don't mean you're not involved in your kids' lives.
100%.
Like, you can bear middle class people who've got two parents, but you won't see the man at all. So it's like, or send their kids to boarding school. Like, that's the thing to do. So so it's way more complicated than it seems.
Yeah, 100%. And also like the war on drugs, right? Like that played a huge part in like separating black families and stuff. Could you go into detail about that? And what
Well,
that
yeah,
did?
in the States, certainly. So this
Yeah.
you get war on drugs, mass incarceration. This is just a massive separation of the family. In the UK, to a lesser extent, but still to an extent, right? So we're actually more overrepresented in the British prison system than in the Americans. They just Britain imprisons less people.
Yeah.
But again, then think about the Caribbean as like the American South, or African colonies as not the South because not slavery, but that relationship there as well. If people can't travel, if you have this migration histories, if there's problems, there's a whole load. Tracy Reynolds, an academic in Greenwich, there's a whole lot about that kind of transnational families and the impact of that. We don't even consider it. Right, our families aren't just here. Our families are spread, and there's huge problems with the way that people can parent because of the immigration policy.
Yeah, 100%. In your book, you also explore like post-racialism. Why must we move beyond this to challenge our present and future and build a new world?
Well, the idea of post-racialism is that racism's dead, it's over. We've got the most diverse government in the history of the West, probably, right? Like, we should be happy, right? We complain about it. We've got black professors, like, it's all good. You got Meghan Markle in the royal family. So there's a big push there that says actually things have changed dramatically. But actually, that's the worst way to look at racism. You have to look at the outcomes for average black people. It's not better. It's actually the world is not better today, and you could make the case it's actually worse. If you actually look at poverty, the life expectancy rates, if you look at mass incarceration in America, etc. Look at the average life of people in like I talk about the Caribbean, like my family's Caribbean. Jamaica's prospects are going down, not up, like really significantly. In 50 years, I'm concerned, right? So that's what you should look at, not whether the few people have supposedly made it.
100%. During the colonial era, we see like the architecture of the Enlightenment that was happening across the world were considered to be white people because of colonialism. How does that play a part in today when we see like our media and like just like our political parties and organizations and stuff like that? So yeah.
In terms of what, sorry?
Pardon?
Like in terms of the Enlightenment?
Yeah, so we like they're the spearheaders of like Enlightenment, which they claim that they are.
Yeah, I mean it should be concerning to us that some of the most violently ugly racist people are still taught in university. Not still taught. The basis of what is taught to our kids. Like, so in the book I do a whole bit about Emmanuel Kant. He actually pronounced his name differently, but I won't pronounce it. But like Emmanuel Kant's like the founder of human rights, etc. All the basis of so much stuff. Actually, I didn't even know how bad it was until I started doing the research. The devil is in the detail, as they say. And there's a bit where he actually writes how best to beat a Negro. So it's just wrong to use a whip because our skin's too thick. So you have to use a split bamboo cane, and that will draw the blood out. This is the person who you still taught today to your kids. Like, this, it's insane. And it's not just him. All of them, Rousseau, Kant, Locke, even Marx. Talk about left racism. Marx is racist as anyone.
Yeah,
100%. And we just kind of forget their racism. But their racism isn't separate to their ideas. Their racism is the foundation of their very ideas. And those ideas are still being taught. Which is why you can then get, politicians, people, black people advocating for these ideas because that's what they've been taught. It's not really their fault in some ways. They've just been taught. Kwasi Kwarteng cutting tax. How are you going to come and cut tax for the richest people? I think that's a sensible thing to do in a cost of living crisis. That's because how he was raised on this nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why programs like Knowledge is Power is key in our system because we have people like this telling us the truth, innit? So, yeah, I'm basically done with questions. I'll leave it to the audience if they have anything to say or ask or, anybody. You put your hand up, bro.
Or something like that. Like, you still think capitalism runs through every aspect of a country, including illegal activity as well?
Yeah, completely. Right. So one, in terms of like, so if you think about, so for example, drug dealing is a perfect example, right? Where black people are more likely to be arrested for selling drugs, or more likely to be arrested for possessing drugs, but are not actually more likely to take drugs or to sell drugs, right? But are still more likely to be arrested for both things. Then look at the actual economics. What are the things which we are involved in drugs tends to be street level. It's not us. We ain't making the millions and millions and millions. We're not importing the stuff in. We're just getting caught on the street, right? So even in that thing, you can see it's still racist, right? Who's providing the actual drugs that come into the country? It's not us, right? We're trapped up. We're in this low level area. So if you actually look at how organized crime works, you see the same things, right? The same kind of imbalances are there because a large of it's about who has the money, who has the wealth, and what do they do with it, right?
Yeah.
My question is about institutional racism. So you might have seen that a few days ago, Cambridge University released a report, the Vice Chancellor Commission, to look at the kind of histories of slavery and the kind of ongoing legacy of slavery in Cambridge. And there's been a push in different institutions, so Lloyd's of London is another one, and just across all different sectors to try and show that they're acknowledging the past by looking into it and making kind of promises to, in Cambridge's case, increase scholarship for black students, promote inclusivity in Cambridge. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Is it possible to kind of revise institutions that are historically racist in that way, or do we just need to get rid of them and start again?
Just get rid of them, start again. I think. No, I mean, like, yeah. Look, universities. I say universities. The place that the idea that we're not human comes from very much university knowledge. Like that's where it comes from. Even before universities, like at least with Christians, it was the idea you could kind of civilize a savage. If we learn the Bible, maybe we could be redeemed. But it's the university comes in and says, nah, you're biologically different. You're actually not the human species. This is the very basis of the knowledge which is produced. And as I said, it's those same knowledge which is the knowledge that we use, right? So when you think about the framework that allows the world still exists in the image of white supremacy. As I said, the poorest people, black people, the richest people, white people, hierarchy in between. That is the world of white supremacy. Universities are totally and utterly culpable in that. In fact, if you're going to like who's to blame, universities are definitely near the top of who's to blame. So the idea you could transform, like, no, they just need to go. Like, and I work in a uni, so like I could maybe I'll be maybe, but because of that though, I think I understand how bad it is.
And then neoliberal hubs, right? Like they literally they uphold that system so highly, and it's just like the revolution's not behind a paywall. Like people shouldn't have to pay £95 for a academic journal that's gone through so much peer reviews by majority of the time white men. Yeah, let's talk about it.
You know what the worst thing about that is though, even if you could access it, you wouldn't want to read it. It's boring as hell. Like, you're not going to help your life at all. You can't. Like when I say so this again because I work at the uni, it's kind of ironic. But what I would say is we're trying to decolonize. We're not trying to decolonize university. My university is no less racist today than it was 4 years ago. It's in fact I could probably say it's probably worse in many ways. What we have done is colonized a space in the university where we do different things. We try to take resources out, and at some point I'll probably leave because I know this is not going to change the thing. So we should be trying to use these institutions to leverage things for the struggle because the universities, I'd say universities cannot be involved in revolutionary struggle. Universities are a target of revolutionary struggle.
100%. I know you had your hand up.
So I just want to ask, do you think one day the black community will have the same rights as other community, maybe equal to other community?
So no, if we keep doing what we are currently doing. I say 100%. If we keep doing what we're currently doing, no, never. And most people will say that. If you ask people, will racism end? They usually say no. Because we're stuck in a framework where it's not possible. But this is not a negative argument because actually I say no, yes, it is definitely possible. And actually we don't have less power. Black people have lots of power, which is why we've been abused in the first place. If you look at why is it that everybody's in Africa, it's because Africa is the richest continent on the planet. It's the poorest in terms of the outcomes because of racial capitalism, but actually in reality it's the richest. It's the only part of the world that could basically say, we have everything we need, you need to leave us alone, and we create a completely new society. Nowhere else could do that. And that's the reason everybody's claws are so deep into Africa. So the power's there, we just have to organize and do things differently. And if we do organize and do things differently, then there is absolutely no reason why we can't have freedom. But we have to understand that we cannot keep doing what we keep doing because that's a complete and utter dead end.
And also, like, it comes back to the thing, like, what is power? Like, power to me is not simply only these people with all these resources and they're the top and, like, the elites. But power to me is, like, community organizing, activism. Like, when you see communities rise up and fight against injustices. Like, when you saw a lot of people on the streets marching for Chris Carver. I know Stafford Scott right there, he's done a lot of activism and he spoke at Chris Carver's protest as well. And that to me is what power looks like. I think when communities collectively come together and fight against injustice. So, yeah, I think you have another question as well. Go on, bro.
I was asked the same question as that, but hearing you speak was like, I was thinking, do you ever think, why do you think people wouldn't change what they do as of now? Like, why do you think people wouldn't change? Is it because of tradition, or is it because of like things that, because like, from my perspective, I'm a black person, it's just like, I want to be having like these works that everyone else, like, I want to be in that rich, I want to live lavish. Like, if I was, like, do you think, like, if you're a white man, you know, if you have a perspective as a white man, do you think you wouldn't have the views that you have now as a black man? Like, you think you wouldn't care about the injustice happening to black people?
That's interesting, right? So, that's a big question, but so I think part of the reason, lots of reasons why people don't do what we should do, right? Partly this is the realities of how we are forced to live. Right? So as I said, Africa is the richest continent, right? But it has some of the poorest people. And if you go to a slum in Lagos, they're not going to be there saying about revolution. It's not. It's about how do we survive? How do we live? Right? Scale that to here. Same case. Like, you 40% youth unemployment. Like, it's about how do you live? So we're forced to be in a way where we're all about survival. And so much of our politics is about how do we survive? How do we survive? How do we survive? And we're put into that situation. I think, would I have? No, I think there's 0% chance that if I was white, I'd have this. I'd be 0% chance, right? That's not because white people can't understand, but there is something about that lived experience, that connection. That, you know, my family came up British Black Power, trying to organize, trying to do things. There's experiences of racism. You can't. Like, somebody was taught me the other day about, well, if black is politics, can't anybody be black? I'm like, nah, because you're not experiencing the same thing when I walk down the street. Like, it's just things that you can never experience if you're not black. Like, you just never experience, right? 100%. And so that means that we just have an opportunity to understand things. Doesn't mean we do, because like quasi-quate, can be bad enough. All these people, you can choose to ignore it and do what you want to do, right? But that's why I say blackness is potentially radical, because once you do embrace it and think about it and then make that connections, and I go to Lagos and, you know, my family's Caribbean, I really got nothing to do with Nigeria. Well, I probably do have a lot to do with Nigeria, but I don't know I have a lot to do with Nigeria. But when I go around there, I'm seeing they look like my son. Like, that looks like my son. That is something which you cannot replace. So that just gives me a connection to it that otherwise wouldn't happen, right? So now blackness is really potentially really important, because again, the opposite side of that is you can then try and push it away and try and run away from it, but it's also embracing it is where you get the radical politics.
100%. Yeah, you.
I'm a history teacher in Tottenham at a secondary school. If you could change one or two, or change the way empire was taught in schools, what kind of ways would you try and change?
One that it is taught. So I think this is part. I'm a professor. I've been through the whole entire school. Never had the word empire once in any class, which should be insane, given that it is the basis of Britain. Like, how do you not talk about it? So I think for me, it would be teach Britain properly, like, and not just in history. Like, this is the whole thing. How do you just economics? How you not teaching politics? How you not teaching empire? Teach empire correctly. Teach where Britain got its wealth from. It's not. This is just knowledge, and it's deeply concerning, because like, for example, if people actually understood empire and Britain, how it got its place in the world, Brexit wouldn't even have been imagined, like, let alone voted for, because people have got, this is a crazy idea. Why would we do this, right? So and in some ways, it's actually this is more an imperative for white people than it is for us, because I teach my kids lots of different stuff. We have community stuff. They have much more opportunity for access. Whereas actually, if you just get your information from the schools and the media, you're blind to the history of Britain. So no, just teach empire as it really continues to be. That would be the simplest thing to do, right?
100%.
Just following on from that question, I think we're speaking about like the education institutions, etc. I think there's a huge community in the older generation. You know, for example, when we're looking at the Queen passing, I saw many older black people.
Morning.
Exactly. So do you think that there is a job to be done in terms of educating older generations in and around this subject?
Yeah, it's difficult, though, isn't it? Like, old people don't want to listen to me. Me going like, yeah. But no, I think like so my grandmother. So I think I've written about this before. My grandmother loved the Queen. Like had a picture of the Queen and Jesus. I think those are the two pictures. And were she alive this last week, she definitely would have probably been down at the coffin, or now the empty box, as I'm saying it, because the Queen were in the box. I'm telling everybody the Queen was not in that box. But anyway. But that is how they were raised. So my grandmother grew up in proper colonial Jamaica, like taught to love the mother country, taught to love the Queen. That's that indoctrination, and that kind of stayed with a lot of that generation. Not everybody though. Like I think a lot of people rethought, particularly Windrush. I mean, hopefully Windrush would have scared people straight. I guess you would call it that. But like, no, I think there is. I think on one hand I want to say yes, there is. On the other hand, I want to say, look, my nan's my nan, man. Like that's how it is. She ain't listening to me, but it's fine. Like we can carry on. Right?
Should we live with this idea of if, no matter how hard we work, we will always be down, we will always be ruled by other people, or we should change it, saying that things will get better, things will change, maybe one day, the future generation will make it change.
Yeah, no, we should do that, but we shouldn't do that if we keep doing the same thing. This is the important thing to say, right? Like, just positive thinking by itself don't get you anywhere. And positive thinking by itself actually gets you to bad places. Like, because then you don't do what needs to be done. Like, I'm not being, like, the New Age of Empire, you read it, you'll be like, well, it's really bad. Like, the editor, my editor said, can you make it more positive? Like, when I said, and you read the book, it didn't get more positive. But that's because this is a prequel. This is the end. This is just you need to kind of deconstruct, break down. You need to, and those feelings of anger, sadness, those are real things. We try to avoid them now. But now you should feel uncomfortable. I should feel uncomfortable that I'm a professor making a very good salary in this wicked system. My hands are no cleaner to the average white person. In fact, they're worse. They're more dirty than most white people. And that should make me uncomfortable. And that uncomfortableness is what will propel me to do things differently. So we have to embrace that discomfort. But on the other side, then we have to say, well, actually, of course we can. Look, capitalism's young. If you actually look historically, it's a blip on the radar, and we've been deluded into believing this is the only way it can be. No, it is not. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Malcolm's talking about revolution. It's actually possible. Like, we could have had a completely different now, had communism work, Pan-Africanism work, other things worked. But now we kind of believe that this is it. It's the end, the end of history. No, we can be free. We just have to do things differently, and that's the energy we need to start approaching things with.
100%.
Yeah, I've got one question. I'm still forming it in my mind, but I think it's really interesting to see how a lot of communities. There was one point where everyone was white and black, right? Anyone who was a person of color or from a migrant community was seen as black, but a lot of communities socialize themselves out of being seen as black, right? And with that, we've seen a lot of like institutions, whether it be like corner shops in different spaces that have pushed equity into communities, or like help communities kind of grow and prosper as parts of the diaspora. Do you think there's any link between our understanding of self as the black community and how we socialize ourselves as that? Links between that and our liberation from capitalism and these systems of oppression that we speak about?
Yeah, so I think one of the things which is overplayed is the history of political blackness in the UK. So politically blackness, everybody's not white is black. There's certainly lots of organising. There still is lots of organising. But the idea that everybody identified as black is just not right. It's not true. It's not the case at all, right? What you did have some organisations that did that, but most organisations weren't even black in the way that I say black. They were Caribbean, like West Indian this or Indian this or that. And there was actually probably more fragmentation in some ways. What you did have in that time was certainly much more unity around like anti-immigration, and there's loads of anti-immigration marches because everybody in the same boat about that. And what you have now with even politically black organising tends to be in universities where there's so few black people that it'd be very difficult to have just a black people organisation. None of us, right? Or so what that history tells us, what tells me anyway, is that the solidarity needs to come from the issues. Like, we don't need to all be black. It's never been the case, never should be the case, and there are massive differences between us. And part of the thing that limits our politics is when we look at nationally. So, actually, the history of black power that I understand is history was connected to African revolutionary movements, Caribbean revolutionary movements, the black power movement in America, and has always been very black in that sense. But has said, look, if we've got an anti-immigration issue, we're going to work together. Obviously, if we've got this issue, we're going to work together. this idea that we all need to have the same, it's a strange one for me, right? This real solidarity comes around the issues, and then also there are real differences, like really significant differences, which can't be underplayed.
So then, like, just going on from that, what would you say maybe are the top three, like, social political issues that should be approached in order to kind of like break down the ideas of the new empire?
Well, in terms of the new empire, like in terms of revolution, this is why I say, look, revolutionary politics, and this is not this book. Back to Black is the book, so I recommend read Back to Black. I'm pitching the book. Obviously, I think you should read it, but get a PDF online, read the book. Like honestly, the revolutionary politics put forward there. It says a Black revolution, which is about bringing together the diaspora, connecting to Africa, and that being the revolution. That is the thing. That is a politics which ends capitalism, and that's the politics which I am involved in. Now, in doing that, that means solidarity with many groups, but it actually means fundamentally that's Black radical politics. If we're saying about how do you bring communities together here in the UK, there's lots of specific issues you can do. I mean, immigration be the one. I mean, we had it in the past. Look at the immigration things that are happening now, horrendous, right? Or even increasingly, criminal justice, right? Islamophobia has meant that before Asians weren't necessarily in the same way caught up in the police, but are becoming there now. So if you want that solidarity, there are many issues you can go with. Trying to say we're all Black is not. It's just got the worst things that's not gonna do it. But actually, just come together around the issues. Access to education. There's lots of things, right?
You've probably written about this already, but what does doing things differently for the revolution look like to you in the context of like a more authoritarian, more neoliberal sort of economy? So it's like on the ground as well, just to sort of add to it. What can people do, like maybe like me or like us, I guess, because I feel like people in my social circles maybe they have a bit more of an appetite for doing something, particularly since the Black Lives Matter movement, but people don't feel like they're equipped with the tools to be able to do anything. They feel kind of powerless. So what in your eyes is the things that we could be doing?
Yeah, so it's in many ways the wherever the context is doesn't change the solution, which is independence, right? If you look at the Black radical argument, it's always been you need Black independent institutions. Like the schools don't work, so we do our own thing educationally. But even if community controls the police, these kind of things, it's about saying, look, we spend a lot of time trying to fix these things which aren't broken. This is the main argument. Like the universities, the schools, the police, they're not broken. So all the time we spend trying to fix them, because they're not broken, right? They're actually fine. They're doing what they should do. So the solution then, and there's a long history in the UK as well, with what the self-help movement or Black Power movement, which says actually, no, look, for instance, housing. Like housing is a good example. Like housing, we couldn't get housing, what did? We organized ourselves. So we could get housing, do partner, do this stuff. And it really helped on the grassroots level. Yeah? Education, same way. Schools aren't working. What do? We do Saturday schools. And again, that helps on the grassroots level. So it's those kind of initiatives. And then the other thing, because there's two parts to this. The Black Panthers call that survival pending revolution. Like stop expecting the state to provide because it's not going to. So you have to do the things you need to survive. But on the other hand, is actually trying to, you have to, in order to have an actual revolutionary politics is global. It's not possible without doing it globally. And the model we have for this is the Universal Negro Improvement Association from Garvey movement in the 1920s, which had between 2 and 8 million members in 50 countries. Like this mass organization that we couldn't even imagine now. But the reason why it is then, this is before there's no phone, let alone internet, there's no social media. You can't like just connect to people like easy. But the reason why it was so popular is because at that point, and I say 1920s, nobody was deluded enough to thinking that there was a space for Black people in America, Black people in Britain, or we want to be in the Caribbean. Like, it's still empire. Like, Caribbean's still this empire, right? And so because people understood the stakes, they were like, yeah, well, let's do something different. And so those are the politics we should be trying to do. On a local level, it's about survival. But on a bigger level, it's about saying, how do you build that organization, that collective across the diaspora? That's where you get the power from. Right? Back to Black's all about that. So I said, Back to Black, get the PDF. I'm sure you can get a PDF online if you don't want to buy it. I should have said that with the bookshop.
I'm completely convinced the outcomes of capitalism have been racist. I don't no argument with that. But I struggle a little bit with whether the actual system is racist or whether it's just exploitative. Because if I want to exploit someone, I'm going to exploit anyone who's weaker than me, who's got something that I actually
Mhm.
And it's exploited plenty of people in this country as well. You know, my family were all miners before, and they were exploited. Well, the black when they came out of the mine, but they were white. You know. But do you think it is racist as a system? And if so, can you explain why? And part of the reason I ask is because if I'm struggling to understand why it's racist, even though I accept the outcomes of being racist, it doesn't exclude me from it. I can still try and help. But if it becomes exploitative, you can bring a whole load more people who have been exploited by it into the same fight against it, rather than saying that they're supporting your fight against it. If you see what I mean? So I wondered if you could give us a bit more on that.
Yeah, because you have to understand, like, no one's saying that capitalism doesn't exploit other people. Of course it does. Like, it's class exploitation, right? But the levels of exploitation you have here have never been the worst levels of exploitation. It's never, right? So we talk about the time in the factory times in the 18th. It was terrible for workers here. It wasn't slavery, and that's not coincidental. That's not by accident. That's by design, right? And if you look now today, like when we talk about the conditions here, they're bad, but they're nowhere near as bad as they are in places like India, China, Africa, right? So So when you have to accept that, and without that super exploitation of black and brown people, we don't even have the working class at all. The working class, the Western working class is only able to be in existence because of the super exploitation of those in the third world. So yes, white people are exploited, but they are not and have never been exploited in the same way, are still not today, and that is a necessary feature of capitalism, which is why capitalism is racism. Right?
Isn't it because it's just easier to exploit people over there and you can't see it?
No, it's easy.
Because of I mean, that's race in the sense that you're exploiting another country. I get that, but that's the point. The easiest people to exploit are the ones who it's out of sight, you can't see it.
Okay, so why is it not? Why is it just coincidental that it is African people, it's black and brown people? There's lots of white people you could have exploited in the same way, but not even Eastern Europeans. It would be surely easier to enslave Eastern Europe, like they're right there. But why not do it? Because that's such embedded into the way that it works, right?
I think you made a good point around the extraction of materials through time as well.
Well, that's why I think Africa gets picked on as well. Yeah.
Definitely, but I think if you look at the uses of like materials or anything, I think the West has always had control of the material world, right? Whereas like the East probably like have control and like a lot more understanding of the spiritual world in terms of like Orishas and gods and whatnot, right? That's why God was used to colonize a lot of Africa. I think a good point to keep in mind if you're trying to really rationalize things is that like a lot of materials that we use are built around rituals, which are built around cultures, right? Which in turn means that there are a specific subset of people who have found and extracted and used this material that you've decided to kind of pillage. And the thread that you can see for everything you said is that like those resources, those minerals, those things that we use are often things that have been extracted and found within black and brown communities. And it's been a consistent thing that's happened throughout history, and that is the backbone of the society we live in today. So as much as you can reduce it down to materials, I think it's a lot about like the human experience around how those materials are found that makes it a problem, and the fact that someone felt that they could exploit a specific subset of people in order to make that so, that you need to acknowledge. And like you can deep dive like into it that way if you want to find your perspective.
And also, Europe does not have gold and oil, so that's something to keep in mind.
But the key thing is you have to accept, and this is the problem the left doesn't do, right? Is you have to accept the racial nature of this. It's not just by accident. And even today, so like actually more back to black than this. No, it isn't this. There's a whole chunk of this about the left and the problems of the left. And I'll go to like Marxist conferences and like, oh, well, that's third worldism. That's third worldism. What on earth does that mean? Like, if you think about the concept, the idea of we are the 99%, that's totally ridiculous. The poorest person in this country is probably in the top 25% of earners in the world. The conditions that we inhabit here, which happen to be white, we're predominantly white, but we're not all white now, are totally and utterly alien to the conditions of most people. Most people in the world don't have an indoor toilet, right? 9 people in the world every year die from hunger. A child dies every 5 seconds because they haven't got access to food and water. All of those are black and brown. So this is the problem. If you don't accept that you're not exploited in the same way as the people in the third world, and they are exploited because of their color, and there is no other explanation for it, then we can't have solidarity. Simple as that. There's just no solidarity. And
Even
I remember
like with the climate crisis, right?
I mean, climate is a good example.
Yeah.
But I give you, back to Black, I do this example because I was at a Black History Month conference, Black History Month event, and there was somebody talking about South African mine. So the South African farm workers were striking, and everybody was supporting that. And this SWP colleague, I don't want to say comrade, colleague, came and was saying, well, if you support those strikes, you have to support the teacher strikes. I'm like, hang on a second. Teachers get paid through what? Taxation. taxation which is taken from a world system which is super exploitative to the very people we're talking about, South African farm workers. So they're actually, no, teachers are actually, you're fighting for a bit more money which has been exploited from South African farmers, and then come and telling me that I'm supposed to be supporting that strike. They're not the same. And this is the problem with the left. It doesn't understand that if you don't understand that racism is absolutely indispensable to capitalism, there is no solidarity. It can't exist.
I guess I'll push back one more time, and it's not because I'm distracted, because I'm trying to understand it, you know. But that's when you talk about China, and they started off exploiting very poor people in China in order to raise the capital to be able to go and exploit people in
No, but they still are, though. You haven't stopped. They still carry on, right? That's my point.
But that's what I mean. It's a system which starts exploiting the people it can exploit, and moves on to exploit the others. And I absolutely, I don't have any disagreement about the outcomes and the rest of it. There's none of that. I'm just trying to think. And you're saying it is, and I will look at it more.
They threw their own people under a bus to raise the system.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, China's a perfect example. Like, this is what they've.
Chucking their own people under the bus wasn't the racist bit, was it?
No. But it is racist. No, but it is. Yeah, that's my point. Is that just because Chinese people are doing it doesn't mean it's not white supremacy. Just because African people do it doesn't mean it's not white supremacy. They're buying into that system. Right? Yeah, and remember, and China can't. Like, China. If China, and this is how you know, like, if China actually pulled everybody out of poverty, China would stop being the place that makes it would completely collapse. So you need those poor black and brown people, right? They're absolutely essential to the way that the world functions. Right?
Do we have any?
We've all been born into it. The reason it's so hard to see is because we are standing on hundreds of years ago.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
So, see capitalism. Do you think elitism, the concept of elitism, is like a big factor in capitalism? Because, like, as you said, capitalism isn't fair. It's like a dog-eat-dog world. So, like, all the richer people will stay at the top, and the poorest people will stay at the bottom and will stay at the bottom. So, do you think elitism? Because I think elitism is a big aspect of capitalism. Elitism aspect.
Yeah, of course it is, totally. But again, you can't separate elitism from whiteness. And then think about when you have like elites. So there are many elites who aren't white, obviously, right? Loads. And one of the teach empire properly, you would learn that without black and brown people, there's no empire, right? India, like the height of the British army in India, most of the army is Indian. Even at the Amritsar massacre, which is like, it was loads of Sikh people shooting Sikh people. You're like, this makes no sense, right? Because it's never just been as simple as the white people do bad things and the black and brown people do good things. Not at all. You've always needed people to administer it, so this is not new in any way, shape, or form. So there is an elite, certainly, which is black in color, but in politics it's certainly not. And if you look at what they're doing, they're just mimicking the rest. And even look at China. Like, China's a perfect example. Like, China, when it has this elite, what do? They just go like get McDonald's, start dressing like European. In fact, China, the baddest thing I heard about China was that China's popular. Most people in the world are lactose intolerant, right? It's like white people and like some African people that aren't lactose intolerant, right? And so, because China's lactose intolerant, most people in China are lactose intolerant, don't really drink milk, hasn't really been a thing, right? But one of the Chinese premiers goes to the Olympics in like 84 or something and sees all these big Americans. I was like, oh, we need to be more like the Americans. Why do they like that? They drink milk. And so there's actually a policy, like a proper policy in China, to get their people weaned onto milk so they can be more like Americans. Like, and they're actually, this is one of the things that's massively increasing climate change, because they're destroying loads of forests, getting loads of cows, etc. And it's all in this pursuit of whiteness. So even like this, it's like, what's the thing, Animal Farm. You just become the pigs, right? And this is exactly what you see with, it's not a coincidence that elite culture just kind of turns into white culture, right? Because that's the point.
Last two questions. Any? I guess. Do we still have time, or is it okay? Yeah. Rounding up the last two questions. Any?
How would you define your
I mean, real solidarity is revolutionary solidarity, right? The system needs to end. I mean, as simple as that. It's like, and it's not. Okay, how do I put this? So, yeah. So one of the things I have, like, so Frantz Fanon, I like a lot of Frantz Fanon stuff, but one of the problems with Fanon is Fanon kind of ends the wretched of the earth with this idea that, you know, you need the white workers to wake up, the sleeping beauty of modernity, who kind of like come and join the struggle. Like, it'd be nice, but I can't wait for it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and the aim cannot be solidarity. The aim should be, we're just going to do what we need to do. And if you're going to be on board, be on board. And if not, get out of the way. But the idea that solidarity is the step is just incorrect. It's even in black people. like, the idea we need all black. No. We just start doing it and then like come along or don't come along. So solidarity is really being supporting the revolutionary struggle in essence, I have to say.
Yeah, and I was going to say that very often when we have conversations about racism, it's either a long, long time ago or it's very far away. Yeah, but it's often difficult to see in this space, in our space. How would you suggest that people look at it in their spaces and recognise it and actually, as you're saying, take action to do something about it?
Well, yeah, look at, any statistic you want to tell you, tell you that education has problems, there's problems with the police, there's problems with the healthcare, there's problems with, there's probably, like, it's not a distant thing. Like, that's the other thing, like, all the evidence is very, very, very clear that everything we talk about globally is very, very much in the UK. If you go to any like corporate place, walk in there and tell me there's no racism. What you're gonna see is white people, you just see a lot of white people and then a couple of tokens, right? Like, there's the idea this is distant is a problem, but like we do need to understand that these distant things are also produced by the global thing, right? But it shouldn't be difficult to find. It shouldn't be difficult for you at all to find instances of racism at all. Or just ask somebody, because somebody will tell you very, 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 very clearly on a small level and on a big level, right? So on a small level, did I use this? No, it wasn't. It was different. Because I've written the next book, I'm getting confused between books. But like on a small level, I go to my workplace, and I'm not joking. Even though I'm the most like visible person, like known person, one of the most known people in the place, I walk around and my colleagues won't look at me at all, because all they see when they're coming down the car is a black man, and so everybody's eyes go down. And I'm like, why is no one looking at me? Why is no one talking to me? And it used to bother me loads. I'm like, why is no one talking to me? And then like I'd stop and say, hey, and then they'd look up and be actually terrified. Like, I'm not joking, I can see the terror. And then they recognize me, and it's like, oh, okay, it's you. And people said, it's you. Oh, it's you. Oh, how are you? Yeah. I used to hate that. I love it there. I just go jumping out at people. Hey. But it's those kind of things that you can't explain. How do you explain? You can't, if you don't experience it, you just no way to understand it. It's in the big things, but it's also in the very, very, very small things that we just have to just kind of get used to every day as well.
You had a question? Yeah.
How would you say revolution differs from abolition?
Thank you.
Okay, how would I say revolution? Okay, I want to give a quick answer for this, because it's not, the simple answer is to say, well, why use abolition, not revolution? I think it's important. I think there is an important thing. There's important work that the term abolition is doing. I think actually a lot of the language of it is the same. I think a lot of even the emphasis of it is the same. But I actually think if you actually look, when you boil it into practice, it does tend to be reforming things, I think. Right, as in like, abolition suggests you can that's it. Abolition suggests you can abolish the problem. You abolish this, you abolish the problem. Well, actually, revolution is saying, well, yeah, you need to abolish it, but you need to replace it. And what you're replacing it with? And abolition doesn't always, I'm not saying it doesn't do it at all, because I think some models do that. But I just always ask the question, why use abolition, not revolution? And I think a lot of it comes from so I'm not in this book, in Back to Black, I talk about liberal radicalism, where there's a kind of radical theory, but the actual practice isn't radical at all, it's liberal. And I think, I don't want to say all abolition is not all abolition, but I think a lot of abolition is really that.
Yeah,
and that's not a bad thing.
I'll add to that as well. I think a lot of the time when we look at abolition, they forget like the practice is transformative justice. I don't know if anybody knows what transformative justice is. Put your hands up if you know transformative justice. Yeah, so that's basically the practice, like what we see with Marion Carver and stuff like that. And that is the revolutionary practice. So yeah, if anybody wants to explore transformative justice even further, Marion Carver explores that as well. And also, get this book as well. So yeah, I think that was the last question. So yeah, thank you so much.
If you would like to buy this book, please head to our website pagesofhackney.co.uk, where you can buy it for collection from the bookshop or for delivery nationwide. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts for more literary events like this.